What's going on, y'all? Getting ready to do this live. I'm doing something a little bit different right now in that I'm actually recording a episode of my podcast at the same time that I'm doing a live video. So bear with me. There's a couple things I'm distracted by. I'm doing two things at once here. So this video is going to be a follow-up to a post that I did recently. What's going on, Sadira? What's going on, Jack? This video and this podcast is a follow-up to my conversation earlier this week on male cluelessness. I recently posted a post on Facebook that was very simple, very straightforward. And it said, ladies, men are effing clueless. I'm sorry. And that's really what I had to say about it. And I got a lot of reactions, a lot of responses to it. Mostly positive, but I had a couple people pushing back, specifically some brothers pushing back against it. And so I wanted to do a follow-up live video, kind of elaborating on it a little bit and giving you my thoughts behind it. Because one of the things that I thought was interesting is that very few people, if anybody, actually asked, what I meant when I said cluelessness. Nobody really went into, delving a little bit deeper behind the surface of the title. And of course, I put it up there partly knowing that it was going to be a bit of a inflammatory, because anytime you generalize, you make a statement about everybody or everyone, there's going to be some pushback on it. So I knew what I was doing, but I was hoping that we would have a little more conversation, a little more questions about it. And really what I was getting into in terms of talking about cluelessness and male cluelessness was not to say that women aren't clueless. That's not the fact at all. We're all clueless about something in life. There's no thing that we are. There's no way that we can be experts on things, everything that we come across. And so particularly relationships between men and women. Any man that takes affront or an offense to the idea that he's clueless in relation to women, got us another thing coming. I think you really need to really think about that a little bit more and recognize the fact that, you don't know everything about yourself. How can you know everything about someone else? But specifically this idea of cluelessness, came up. Because, I was doing some planning with my organization, the Fathering Circle, and we talked about how could we address this issue of the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement and, this issue of sexual harassment, the issue of sexual harassment. Sorry about the volume. I'm glad you told me. We're trying to deal with this issue of sexual harassment and the Me Too movement in society. I'm trying to work on the volume. But really the cluelessness issue came up when we started talking about how do women want us to address this issue? What would be good from the perspective of a woman listening to a man, elaborate or talk about the issue of Me Too. And really it came down from the women's responses. We talked about would a woman be interested in receiving an apology from someone who had sexually harassed them or had somehow in a way been inappropriate towards them, a man being inappropriate to a woman, and what her response would be. And it was some good feedback from the ladies in terms of, trying to figure out what was the purpose of the apology? How would a woman know that a man was sincere with his apology? How would we be able to, how would they have proof or evidence that, it wasn't just lip service and that the brother wasn't going out to then do the same thing or something similar to another woman? And that he wasn't just looking for an apology just to make himself feel better. And so that's part of where it came from. But then the other thing came from, some of the stories that are in the news about some of the celebrities. There's a case with Aziz Ansari right now, who has a woman who accused him of sexual harassment. And I'm not sure if it went as far as rape. I don't think it did. But basically what she's saying is that, she was objecting to his advances, but she didn't forcefully object to him. So in other words, it was kind of like Aziz Ansari says, hey, it was all consensual. We went out on a date, and, he made advances towards her. And as far as he knows, it was consensual. She's coming back later on and saying that, well, she didn't push back harder because she was afraid, she was concerned and worried about, his retaliating against her, all sorts of things. The story is very similar for, and let me know if the sound is okay on this. At one time I was having issues with the sound, but at one time, Russell Simmons' case is very similar. There's a model that talks about how, back in the 80s when Run DMC was very popular, Russell Simmons approached this woman at a nightclub. She was a popular model at the time. He offered to take her home to her apartment or drive her home to her apartment. And she got into his limousine. And then he and his driver, proceeded to not take her to her apartment and go back to his apartment. And she felt intimidated by that. She felt like, she couldn't fight back. She felt like that she was in a position where there were two men bigger than her and stronger than her. And so she was at a disadvantage. And he, actually apologized for his behavior. But part of his apology included this idea of this cluelessness, not knowing that it was inappropriate, not knowing that it was really forceful against her will, that it was more of, what men are taught to do in terms of being adamant or being forceful in terms of coercing a woman into, relationship, sexual relations or dating or whatever the extent you want to call it. Right. And so this is where this idea of cluelessness comes up from, because, the men that are being accused, often revert back to this idea of innocence. Like, I didn't know, or we didn't know that it was a problem, or we thought that was how, it was supposed to happen. And the reality is this is the way men are socialized. Unfortunately, we're taught that this is how we should operate and how, we hear the saying that no means no, but, we hear the idea that women play hard to get, right? And so we get this conflicting message of how to approach women or how to deal with women when they may not be immediately agreeable to what we want to do in terms of relationships or sexual interactions with one another, right? And so the reason why I say male cluelessness is dangerous, and I'm not excluding women from this idea of cluelessness, but it's the male cluelessness that leads to sexual assault charges. It's the male cluelessness that leads to abuse. Oftentimes there's some level of aggression that goes towards this, and we don't want to understand. Really, it's a lack of understanding. I mean, I know there are plenty of women out there that would disagree that, men are clueless when it comes to their behavior towards women and behavior in relationships. And I'm not saying that that's not the case. I'm not saying that there aren't some men who are just animals, just barbarians. They're dogs. They're going to do what they want to do in terms of trying to get a woman or trying to get from a woman what they want out of a woman. But what I'm saying is, and I'm sorry about the camera. I got to get this, my setup a little bit better. But what I'm saying is that, men, we cannot afford to be clueless. We cannot afford to be ignorant any longer. We can't afford to allow, our testosterone and our aggression to motivate our actions. Because what happens is we see this situation come up time and time again. And part of the cluelessness that I'm talking about when it relates to men is the damage that it does to women and young girls. And it often starts with young women at a very early age. And so they're taught, they're trained and conditioned that this is the way men are. And so as they get older, it becomes almost easier for it to happen to them. And so what I'm saying to men out here is that we've got to do better in terms of being conscious. We've got to do better in terms of being conscientious about women's feelings, their rights when it comes to their own bodies, their right to change their mind. You know, we could be halfway through the act. We could be in the middle of the act with a woman, and she still has the right to change her mind. And we have to accept that. We have to accept that they are human beings, just like we're human beings. And for a large part, I think that part of the lack of understanding is that men often aren't victims, where they are forced to do anything out with their body or outside of their control for another human being. There's two sides of this coin of the way men are socialized. Men are socialized to be leaders. They're socialized to be independent, to not care for another person, to be independent when they, in their lives. To be independent in their lives and not have to care for another person or another human being, the way women are. But they're also not taught empathy. They're not taught compassion. This is part of why raising young men is so important, why we have to have this understanding and not just fall back on the old trope of, teaching a boy to be a man. Because unfortunately, historically, that has been a detriment to women. And so, again, this idea of cluelessness, I had comments where somebody was saying that, oh, well, society pits us against one another and sets us up to continue to fight one another. And that's one of the reasons why I made the post the way I did. And I made the statement that men are clueless, including myself. And I'm sorry. I apologize. Because at some point in time, we have to step outside that cycle of harming one another. We have to step outside this the repetitiveness of hurt people hurting other people. And we have to be adults, and we have to be mature and step up and own our faults. We have to own the pains and the hurts that we cause other people. And so that's what I hope to get out of this conversation. That's what I hope to elicit from men. Men have no problem trying to step up and consider themselves leaders, right? Our egos are well equipped for that. We're socialized at an early age, to be Superman and G.I. Joe and the captain of everything. We want to be the quarterback of the team. But part of that is stepping up and accepting responsibility and saying, I'm sorry. Even in situations where you may not be the perpetrator, you may not have victimized someone right then and there or in the recent past. But, at some point in time, I think it's safe to say that all men have done something. And again, this is not to excuse women from the conversation or from the responsibility, but it's to start the process. It's to start the conversation. And so, again, I just wanted to take a few minutes to share this information with you. Again, let me know what you think about this conversation. If you've part of the original conversation on our post, if you have any questions or any comments that you want to share, you feel free to share it here at the Fathering Circle. You can share it there on our Facebook page. And you can find us on Spreaker on our podcast. So thank y'all for listening. Thank y'all for following. And let's continue the conversation. All right. Peace.